In this lesson, we will talk about how to create a quiz game. Alright, so I already have the final result. So let's try to playtest this game and let's see what it's all about. So as you can see, we have a timer. Some of the questions have timers. We have a score. We have multi and single selectable answers. If we choose the correct answers, we get more points and we get this resolution screen which tells us that we picked the right answer. If we pick a wrong answer, we get a different resolution screen and we subtract the score. You can see now we finished the game and we can see the final score and our high score. You can always, if you want, play again, and what that does is simply just reloads the scene and then you can just play the game again. And the good part about this is that it's randomly, the questions are randomly picked, so every time you play you will get different questions. So inside of a game manager we are going to control the main functionality of a game. The UI manager is going to be responsible for displaying UI elements, and the questions, if you go to resources and questions, these are all of our questions. And the good part about this is that you don't have to manually assign these questions, because whenever you play the game, the questions are going to be loaded from this folder into the game manager. So you can just go and create questions and simply play the game, and all of these new created questions will be automatically loaded when you start the game. And this is how the question looks like. We have, of course, the question, we have some parameters, and we have answers. So let's go into our new project and let's actually set up this UI system. So the first thing I want to do is I want to, first of all, create an image, and I want to scale it to fill in the canvas. So this is going to be our background, and for the color I want to be kind of similar as in the example, something like this. Let's rename our canvas to be the main canvas. Let's create an empty game object inside of our canvas. Let's make this to fill in entire canvas, and let's call this content. Then let's simply drop our image to be child of the content. Alright, so now let's create a brand new image, and this is going to be our table background. So let's make this stretch to fill in the canvas. Let's give it a color, something like this. And let's make this a bit smaller. So let's say 400 and 400. And let's also, of course, rename this object to be something like quiz table background. Alright, so the next thing we want to do is we want to create the header. So this is where we're going to display our question. So let's create a brand new image. Let's make this to stretch on the top, and let's give it a little bit of the offset. Let's make this a bit like -50, and the height to be something like 280. Alright, so now let's give it a color, something like this. The next thing we want to do is, of course, rename this image. Alright, so the next thing we want to do is we want to add the text. So this is where we're going to display our question. So let's go and let's add the text. Alright, so let's rename this object to be something like question info. Let's also make this text to be filled in into this entire content area. Then let's fix some alignment to be in the middle center. Let's also increase the size to be something maybe like 50. Let's also make this text bold, and let's change the color to be something like that. I also want to change the font because I don't like this font, which comes with TextMesh Pro. The one we are going to be using is called Roboto, and we can use these files, which is a TTF file. What we need to do first is we need to create the font asset, and to do that we need to go to TextMesh Pro and then Font Asset Creator. And here you have this window where you can create your font asset. The only thing you need to do is you need to choose the TTF file. So for example, Roboto regular, put it as a font source, and press Generate Font Atlas. You can of course tweak these parameters, but I found that it's not necessary, and just simply press Generate Font Atlas and it will create the font atlas, and then we can save it into our font asset. So now, as you can see, we have this Roboto regular font asset, and this is what we can use as our font. Let's create a couple of more font assets. Alright, so after we created these font assets, we can simply close down this window and we can start using these custom fonts. So let's go to our question info text object. Let's reference our Roboto regular font asset. Let's increase the dialect, which is thickness. so as you can see. So we're going to increase it by 0.1. All right, so afterwards, we are going to create, what we need to do is we need to create the timer. So let's create a brand new image. Let's call this to something like timer. Let's set the anchor to be the upper right. So press Ctrl and Alt. Let's make the X position to be something like 50. And let's also change the width and the height to be something like 165 and 165. What I also want to do is I want to rotate this element to be something like -225. At the moment we have this image, which is simply just a rectangle. We don't really want that. Of course, we want something like a circular sprite. So I already have a couple of sprites ready for this project. You can of course create your own sprites or use these ones. So you can simply just go and you can reference this circle sprite. What I also want to do is I want to set the timer to be the child of the question content area. And then let's do exactly the same thing as we did before. Let's press Shift, Alt, and let's set the anchor. And let's also set the position X to be something like 50. And now as you can see, it looks much better. Let's also change the color to be something like dark gray. And this is pretty good. Let's also create a text object. And this is this is going to be our timer. So let's make this stretch to fill in the entire element. Let's set the alignment to be middle center. And let's make this bold. Let's also change the font asset to be something like, let's use medium. Let's also increase the font size to be something like 55. Let's also add a little bit of underlay, which is the shadow. So let's press enable to enable this effect. So let's put the Y offset to be 1. Let's also change the color to be fully opaque. And let's also change the color to be something like light gray. Let's also rename this text object to be something like timer text. Alright, so the next thing we need to do is we need to add, of course, the place where we're gonna store our answers. So let's create a brand new image. Let's make this stretch to fill in the entire content area. Let's give it a bit of offset, something like 50, 365 on the top and 150 on the bottom. Let's also remove the image from this object, or let's actually duplicate this image. Let's make this a child of the first image. Let's remove image component and canvas render. Let's rename this object to be something like answers folder. And let's rename this to be something like answers content area. Let's also change the color to be something like dark gray. Let's give it a sprite to be something like UI mask. And let's set the color to be completely black. Let's also add the scroll bar. Let's make direction from the bottom to top. Let's also make this stretch to the right. And let's set the width to be something like 30. Let's go to scene view and let's actually change the answers content area to be something like this. Now inside of our answers content area object, let's create a brand new empty game object. Let's make this stretch to the top, and this is going to be the holder where we're going to store all of our answers. So let's call this something like answers content area. Let's also add the mask, so all the elements that are going to be outside of this content area are going to be masked. So this is where we're going to use the scroll bar to reveal all the other elements that are outside of this content area. So let's add in the rec mask 2D. Let's also change some colors of our scroll bar. Let's change the background image to be something like this. So really slight black color. Let's change the normal color to be something like this. Let's change the highlighted color to be like normal color, but with half of the alpha value. Let's make the press color to be identical to our normal color and disable color to be completely invisible. Let's also change the navigation to be equal to none, so meaning that we won't use any navigation, and that's all we need to do for this element. So now let's go to our answers holder and let's add in the scroll rec component. The first thing we need to reference is our content. So we're gonna reference this game object, which is where we're going to store our answers. Let's disable the horizontal because we're only going to be using the vertical scroll. Let's change the movement type to something like clamped. Let's change the scroll sensitivity to something like 150. And let's also reference our scroll bar, which is going to be this one. What we're going to use is we're going to use the auto hide and expand viewport. So what we need to reference now is we need to reference our viewport. And our viewport is going to be answers content area. And right off the bat, as you can see, if you go to our answers content area, you can see that this is how it looks like. So if you, for example, play the game, you can see that in the beginning, we do not have our scroll bar and our content area is now completely full width. If we, for example, add more elements, something like this, you can see that we have our scroll bar and our viewport is now resized to be, actually it's not completely correct. Let's go back to Unity. Let's press on our answers content area and press Shift Alt and press on the upper left anchor. Let's also select our content area and let's make it stretch to the top. So now if we play the game, it should actually work fine, I believe. Let's try to test this and let's, for example, we add more elements. And as you can see, it works as it should. So the next element we need to add is we need to add the button to go to the next question. So let's go and let's add in the button. Let's make this button to be an anchor of the middle bottom. Let's change the Y position to something like 25. Let's also change the height to be something like 100 and the width to be something like 250. For this button, I kind of want to have this red color, and this is something that I want to have. You can of course add any color you want. I also want to remove the sprite, so to have just completely basic rectangle. For the text, I want to first of all remove this default Unity text and replace it with TextSplash Pro text. Let's make this stretch to fill in the entire, well, button. Let's call this something like next. So for the font, I'm going to be using Roboto Light. Let's add a little bit of softness, something like 0.1, and let's also add the dilate to be something like 0.25. I also want to increase the font size to be something like 42.5. Okay, let's of course rename these elements to be something like next button. And let's rename this text object to be something like label. So the next thing we want to do is we want to add in the score counter. So let's create a brand new text object. Let's make this text object to be the child of the content object. Let's set the anchor to be the upper left. Let's set the X position to be something like 25 and Y position to be something like -25. Let's change the width to be something like 356 and the height to be something like 150. Now I want to change, of course, the font, and I want to use the medium. Let's also change the font size to be something like 50. Let's actually make this text just a little bit darker to be something like 65. And let's also rename this text object to be something like score counter. So we're pretty much done with our UI. I also want to add a couple of other things. The first thing I want to add is I want to add the vignette. So let's first of all create a brand new image. Let's make this a child of content. Let's make this stretch to fill in the entire canvas. Let's reference our vignette. Let's disable raycast target. Let's set the alpha to be something like 35. And that looks much better. All right, so let's rename this image to be something like vignette. Now we need to create the resolution screen. So let's create a brand new canvas, and let's call this canvas something like resolution canvas. Let's also go to our main canvas, and let's change our canvas scaler to be a scale with screen size. And let's change the reference resolution to be something to be 1920 and the Y to be 1080. Let's also add the canvas group, which we will use later on. So let's do exactly the same thing with our resolution canvas. Let's change the canvas scaler to be scale with screen size. Let's put in the reference resolution to be something like 1920 and 1080. Let's also make the match 100%. All right, so the next thing we need to do is we need to create the background of the resolution screen. So let's create a brand new image. Let's make this stretch to fill in the entire canvas, and let's change the color to be something like blue. Obviously, we will change the color depending on what resolution screen we want to display. So if you display, for example, a correct resolution screen, we are going to use the green color. Whenever we're going to display the incorrect, we're going to display the red color, and whenever we're going to display the final resolution, we are going to use something like a blue color. Obviously, you can do whatever you want, but this is what I chose to use, and this is the color I want to use for the background. Let's change this name to be something like resolution screen. All right, let's also add the canvas group component. So this is what we're going to use to fade in and out our resolution screen. The next thing we need to do is we need to create the header. This is where we're going to display our state information. So let's make this text object to stretch in the middle. Let's make our Y position to be something like 160 and the height to be something like 380. Let's make the font size 185 and let's change the alignment to be the middle and the bottom. Let's change the text to be something like correct. We of course want to change the font asset. I want to use the medium, but I don't really want to use this light shadow. So let's simply go and let's duplicate this asset. And let's rename this to be something like dark shadow. All right, so now let's simply reference this as our font asset. And let's change some of the settings. So for our shadow, let's move the X offset to be 1. And let's also change the color to be something like dark gray. Let's rename this text object to be something like state info text. Let's also add the other text. And this is going to be our score. Let's also set the anchor to stretch in the middle. Let's set the Y position to be something like minus 130. And let's set the height to be something like 200. All right, so let's change the alignment to be something like middle center. Let's change the font size to something like 125. Let's change the default text to something like +10. And let's of course change the font asset to be the same asset as we used for our state information text. So let's rename this object to be something like score text. So we are going to have some of the finish elements. So whenever we finish the game, we will display certain elements. So let's create a brand new empty game object inside of our resolution screen. Let's make this object stretch to fill in the canvas. Let's rename this object to be something like game finish elements. Let's add in now a new element, which is going to be our text object. And this is where we're going to view our high score. So for let's make this stretch on the bottom. Let's change the font size to be something like 85. Let's set the Y position to be something like 110 and the height to be something like 200. Let's set the alignment to be center and bottom, and let's also change the font asset to be the same as the others. All right, so now let's rename this text object to be something like high score text. All right, so let's create a couple of more elements. So the first element we want to create is the exit button. And then the other button is going to be to restart the game. So let's create a brand new button. Let's set the anchor to be the upper right. Let's set the position to be something like -25 and -25 on the y-axis. Let's change the width to be something like 610. And let's set the height to be something like 145. All right. So of course, let's change this image to be something else because at the moment it looks really bad. I already made this really simple sprite, which is simply just a dark background with the outline. So let's simply reference that as our source image. And as you can see, it looks really bad at the moment because the image is not tiled. So let's simply go to our box image. Let's go to our sprite editor and let's simply set up our sprite borders. So let's say something like 10 on all sides, and let's simply press apply. So now let's go back to our button and let's change the image type to be tiled. And as you can see now, we have this really nice border and there's no stretchiness going on anymore. All right, so now let's go back to our label, which is of course the default Unity text. So let's simply delete that and let's create a brand new Text Mesh Pro object. Let's make this stretch within this button. Let's rename this something like play again. Let's change the font asset to be something like like this, which is the Roboto medium with a light shadow. Let's change the font size to be something like 85. Alright, let's rename these elements to be something like so we need another button to exit the game. So let's simply duplicate this current button and let's change this to exit. Let's set the anchor to be something like lower left. Let's also set the width to be something like 320. For the X position, let's put it 25, and for the Y position, let's put it also 25. So now the only thing we need to do is we need to change the label to something like exit. One of the other things we need to do is we need to make sure that our resolution canvas has the higher sort order as our main canvas, because we will display our resolution elements on top of the game UI elements. So let's simply change our sort order of our resolution canvas to be something like 1. Then our main canvas sort order is set to 0. Let's also change our buttons to have no navigation. Let's also make sure that our game finish elements by default are disabled. So we're pretty much done with our UI system. It's of course nothing special, but I encourage you all to go crazy and create something much better than this. Alright, so we're pretty much done with this lesson. In the next tutorial, we are going to create or start creating our game functionality. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you very soon in the next lesson.